February 23, 2019. A Saturday. The Francisco de Paula Santander International Bridge connecting Colombia to Venezuela. 10,000 people stand on the Colombian side waiting. They are not refugees. They are volunteers. Students, aid workers, locals from Cucuta who drove hours to be here. Behind them, 18-wheeler trucks stacked with food, rice, flour, medicine, diapers, all stamped with USAID logos. The trucks are not moving. Because on the Venezuelan side, 400 meters away, the Bolivarian National Guard has parked fuel tankers across the bridge, not as a blockade, as a threat. Light a match and the whole thing goes up. Nicolás Maduro, the president of Venezuela, went on television 3 days earlier and said, "We do not need their poisoned food. This is not humanitarian aid. This is a Trojan horse for invasion." The crowd starts chanting, "Libertad, libertad, freedom." The guards do not move. At 11:47 a.m., someone throws a Molotov cocktail. The tanker on the left side catches fire. Black smoke pours into the sky. The crowd surges forward. The guards open fire. Rubber bullets first. Then live rounds. 7 people die that day. The aid never crosses. The trucks turn around and drive back to Bogota. And $300 trillion, the estimated value of Venezuela's oil reserves, the largest proven reserves on the planet, remains locked inside a country that is eating zoo animals to survive. This is not a story about socialism versus capitalism. This is not a story about democracy versus dictatorship. This is a story about the greatest resource heist in modern history, about how a nation sitting on more crude oil than Saudi Arabia, more than Russia, more than the entire Middle East combined, became a place where teachers make $6 a month and hyperinflation hit 10 million%, about how the United States spent 2 decades trying to take control of that oil without ever sending a single soldier across the border, about how Nicolás Maduro, a former bus driver with no college degree, outplayed the CIA, survived 4 assassination attempts, and turned his country into an authoritarian petrostate while the world watched, and about how the real war was never about ideology. It was always about who controls the valve. Let's go back. 1998. Caracas, Venezuela. A man named Hugo Chavez wins the presidency with 56% of the vote. He is not supposed to win. He is a former military officer who led a failed coup in 1992. He spent 2 years in prison. The establishment thinks he is a joke, a populist with no economic plan. But Chavez understands something the elites do not. Venezuela has been drilling oil for 70 years, and the majority of the population has never seen a single bolivar from it. The oil money goes to foreign companies, to Exxon, to Chevron, to ConocoPhillips, to the Venezuelan oligarchs who own the refining contracts. Chavez runs on a simple promise: the oil belongs to the people. On December 6, 1998, the day he is elected, crude oil is trading at $11 per barrel. Venezuela is producing 3.2 million barrels per day. That is $35 million in daily revenue. It sounds like a lot, but 70% of it is going offshore, into foreign bank accounts, into profit-sharing agreements signed in the 1970s that give international oil companies first claim on revenue. Chavez looks at the contracts and sees colonialism with a corporate logo. His first move is the 1999 Constitution. He rewrites the entire legal framework of the country. Article 12 reads, "The state reserves to itself the petroleum industry and other industries, exploitations, services and goods of public utility and of primary importance for the economic and social development of the country." That is legalese for nationalization. The foreign companies panic. They call the State Department. They call the CIA. They call their lobbyists in Washington. Because if Venezuela takes back its oil, the entire Latin American model collapses. You cannot have resource sovereignty spreading, not when the United States consumes 20 million barrels of oil per day and only produces 9 million domestically. Venezuela is the 4th largest supplier of crude to American refineries. Chavez is not just threatening Venezuela's oil. He is threatening Houston's profit margin. Oil hits $26 per barrel. Chavez creates a new state oil company called PDVSA, Petróleos de Venezuela. Except PDVSA already exists. It has existed since 1976, but the old PDVSA was run by technocrats who went to MIT and had summer homes in Miami. Chavez fires 18,000 employees in a single week. Engineers, geologists, accountants, people who know how to run an oil company. He replaces them with loyalists, with people from the barrios, with people who have never worked in the oil industry but who believe in the revolution. Production drops immediately, from 3.2 million barrels per day in 2001 to 2.4 million by the end of 2002. The money starts disappearing. Not because of corruption. Well, not only because of corruption, but because the new managers do not know how to maintain the wells. They do not know how to manage the refineries. They are drilling blind, and the infrastructure, built in the 1960s and 70s, starts to crumble. April 11th, 2002. A coup. Not a popular uprising. A military coup. Chavez is arrested at gunpoint in the presidential palace at 3:20 a.m. He's flown to a military base on the Orchila Island. The coup leader is a man named Pedro Carmona, the head of Venezuela's largest business federation. Within 6 hours, he dissolves the National Assembly, suspends the Supreme Court, and declares himself president. The White House issues a statement at 9:15 a.m. We hope that this transition will lead to a restoration of democratic norms. That is diplomatic code for we support the coup. But the coup fails, because the soldiers who are supposed to guard Chavez on the island refuse to kill him. They are poor kids from the same neighborhood Chavez grew up in. They are not going to execute him for Pedro Carmona and the oligarchs. On April 13th, 47 hours after he was arrested, Chavez is back in the palace. The coup plotters flee to Miami. Carmona gets asylum in Colombia, and Chavez goes on television and says, "They tried to kill the revolution, but the revolution cannot be killed." The crowd outside the palace chants his name for 3 hours straight. But the message is clear. The United States wants him gone, and the oil companies will fund anyone willing to make it happen. In 2003, Exxon files a lawsuit in international court demanding $4 billion in compensation for assets seized during nationalization. Chevron does the same. ConocoPhillips asks for $8 billion. The lawsuits will drag on for a decade, but they are not really about money. They are about setting a precedent. If Chavez wins, every other oil-producing nation in Latin America will try the same thing. Bolivia, Ecuador, Brazil. The dominoes cannot fall. 2004 to 2012. The golden years. Oil prices explode. In January 2004, crude is at $32 per barrel. By July 2008, it hits $147. Venezuela is printing money. Literally. Chavez uses the oil revenue to fund social programs. Free healthcare. Free education. Subsidized housing. He cuts poverty in half. Illiteracy drops from 11% to 4%. For the first time in Venezuelan history, poor people can see a doctor without selling their furniture. The middle class and the elites hate him, but the majority, the people who live in the ranchos on the hillsides of Caracas, worship him. He is on television every Sunday for 4 to 6 hours with a show called A lo Presidente. He sings. He quotes Bolivar. He calls George W. Bush the devil at the United Nations in 2006. The speech gets a standing ovation from half the General Assembly. Chavez becomes the face of anti-American resistance in Latin America. He is funding guerrilla groups in Colombia. He is selling subsidized oil to Cuba. He's flying to Tehran and Moscow and Beijing and signing deals that cut the United States out entirely. By 2012, Venezuela is producing 2.9 million barrels per day again. Chavez is a hero, and the United States cannot touch him, because oil is above $100 a barrel, and killing him would spike prices even higher. So they wait. December 8th, 2012, Chavez goes on television and announces he has cancer, pelvic cancer. He has been fighting it for 2 years in secret. He is flying to Cuba for surgery. He names his successor, a man named Nicolas Maduro. Nobody outside Venezuela has heard of him. Maduro is not a general. He is not an economist. He is a former bus driver and union organizer. He has a high school education. He met Chavez in the 1990s during the failed coup and became his most loyal enforcer. Chavez says, "If something happens to me, vote for Maduro. He is the son of Chavez. On March 5, 2013, Hugo Chavez dies in a military hospital in Caracas. He is 58 years old. The country erupts. Millions pour into the streets. Some are mourning, some are celebrating. Maduro takes power the same day. He does not wait for an election. He just declares himself president under emergency constitutional powers. The opposition screams fraud. The United States refuses to recognize him. And on March 6, 2013, oil closes at $92 per barrel. The golden years are over. Maduro is not Chavez. Chavez was charismatic, a showman, a tactician. Maduro is wooden, paranoid. He gives speeches where he claims the United States is using secret weather weapons to cause droughts. He says the CIA gave Chavez cancer. He arrests opposition leaders on live television. But the real problem is not his personality. It is the price of oil. In June 2014, crude is at $107. By December, it is $62. By January 2016, it is $28. Venezuela's economy is built on one thing, and that one thing just collapsed. The social programs evaporate, the food subsidies disappear, the currency, the bolivar, goes into free fall. In 2013, $1 is worth 10 bolivars. By 2016, $1 is worth 1,000 bolivars on the black market. People are standing in line for 8 hours to buy toilet paper. Hospitals run out of medicine. The murder rate in Caracas becomes the highest in the world, 89 homicides per 100,000 people. And Maduro, instead of admitting the model is failing, blames the United States. He calls it economic warfare. And in a way, he is not wrong. January 2017, Donald Trump takes office. His Secretary of State is Rex Tillerson, the former CEO of ExxonMobil, the same company that is still suing Venezuela for $4 billion. Tillerson's first major policy speech as Secretary of State is at the University of Texas on February 1, 2017. He talks about Latin America. He talks about the Venezuela problem. He does not say regime change. He says transition. That is State Department code. Within 3 months, the United States imposes sanctions on Venezuela, not on the government, on the oil industry. Executive Order 13808, signed August 25, 2017, prohibits American companies from participating in any debt financing related to the Venezuelan government, or PDVSA. That sounds technical, but what it means is that Venezuela can no longer borrow money to maintain its oil infrastructure. The wells are old. The refineries are falling apart. You need constant capital investment to keep production stable, and overnight that capital disappears. By the end of 2017, Venezuelan oil production drops to 2 million barrels per day. By 2018, it is 1.4 million. The country is collapsing. And the United States is not hiding the fact that they want it to collapse faster. March 2018. Maduro wins re-election. 67% of the vote. Except the opposition boycotts the election. Turnout is 46%. The Organization of American States calls it illegitimate. The European Union refuses to recognize the results. The Trump administration immediately announces additional sanctions. This time, they target individuals. Maduro's inner circle, his vice president, his defense minister, his oil minister. Their assets in the United States are frozen. Their visas are revoked. The message is clear. Abandon Maduro and you get to keep your Miami condo. Stay loyal and you lose everything. But the inner circle does not flip, because they know what happens to people who flip in authoritarian regimes. Chavez's old allies who turned on him ended up dead or in exile. Maduro is paranoid, but he is not stupid. He purges anyone he does not trust. In April 2018, he arrests 2 opposition leaders, Leopoldo Lopez and Antonio Ledesma. Both are placed under house arrest. The charges are treason. The evidence is fabricated. The trials are closed to international observers. Human Rights Watch calls it a sham. Maduro does not care. He is not trying to win a PR war. He is trying to survive. January 23, 2019, the day everything accelerates. Juan Guaido, a 35-year-old congressman nobody has heard of, stands in front of a crowd in Caracas and declares himself interim president of Venezuela, not through an election, through a constitutional loophole. Article 233 of the Venezuelan Constitution says that if the presidency is vacant, the head of the National Assembly assumes power. Guaido argues that because Maduro's 2018 election was fraudulent, the presidency is vacant. It is a legal stretch, but it does not matter, because within 6 hours, the United States recognizes Guaido as the legitimate president. Then Canada, then Brazil, then Colombia, then the entire Lima Group, a coalition of 14 Latin American nations. By the end of the week, 54 countries recognize Guaido. Maduro is still in the palace. He still controls the military. He still has the oil. But on paper, according to half the world, he is no longer president. It is the strangest geopolitical moment of the decade. 2 presidents, 1 country, and $300 trillion in oil sitting in the ground while the population starves. But Guaido has a problem. He has no power. He can hold rallies. He can give speeches, but he does not control a single government building. He does not control the military. He does not control the oil fields. He is a president without a country. The Trump administration tries to fix this. In February 2019, they hand control of Venezuela's American assets to Guaido. PDVSA has refineries in the United States. Citigo, the gas station chain, is a wholly owned subsidiary of PDVSA. It is worth $8 billion. On February 7th, the U.S. Treasury Department transfers control of Citigo to Guaido's interim government. Maduro loses access to $8 billion in assets overnight. He goes on television and calls it theft. The gringos are stealing our refineries, he says. And legally, he is not wrong, because Maduro is still recognized by the United Nations as the legitimate president. The UN does not recognize Guaido. Russia does not. China does not. And those are the countries that actually matter, because they are the ones buying Venezuelan oil. March 2019, the United States tightens the noose. They impose sanctions on any company that transports Venezuelan oil, any tanker, any shipping company, any insurance provider. If you do business with PDVSA, you cannot do business with the United States. It is a binary choice. And for most companies, it is not a choice at all. You do not give up access to the U.S. market for Venezuela. By May 2019, Venezuelan oil exports dropped to 750,000 barrels per day, the lowest level since 1943. The country is running out of money. Maduro starts paying government salaries every other month. Teachers, nurses, police officers. They are making the equivalent of $4 per month. The bolivar is worthless. People start using Colombian pesos, US dollars, anything but the national currency. Hyperinflation hits 2 million%. A cup of coffee in Caracas cost 500,000 bolivars in June 2019. A month later, it costs 2 million. Money is printed so fast that the ink does not dry before it is spent. The central bank runs out of paper. They start importing bills from China, but the Chinese bills get held up in customs because of US sanctions on shipping. The economy is not just collapsing, it is disappearing. But Maduro does not fall, because the military stays loyal, and the military stays loyal because Maduro gives them the oil, not the revenue, the actual oil. He lets the generals run smuggling operations. They sell crude on the black market to Cuba, to Russia, to China, to anyone who will pay cash. The going rate is $40 per barrel when the global price is $60. They are selling at a discount, but they are selling. And the money does not go into the treasury. It goes into offshore accounts. The generals are getting rich while the country starves, but they are also the only thing keeping Maduro in power. In April 2019, the United States tries to flip them. John Bolton, Trump's national security advisor, goes on television and offers amnesty to any Venezuelan military officer who defects. "We will protect you," he says. "We will give you asylum. Just abandon Maduro." 3 generals defect. That is it. 3 out of 2,000. The rest stay, because they know that if Guaido takes power, the first thing he will do is prosecute them for corruption. Maduro is a dictator, but he is their dictator. And as long as the oil keeps flowing into their pockets, they will keep him alive. May 2019. The assassination attempt. Maduro was giving a speech at a military parade in Caracas. 2 drones, commercial DJI models, fly into the plaza. Each one is carrying a kilogram of C4 explosives. They detonate 60 meters from the stage. The explosion is loud, but the drones are too far away. Maduro is not injured. 7 soldiers are. The footage is surreal. You can see Maduro flinch. You can see his wife duck. And then, 3 seconds later, he is back at the podium pretending nothing happened. They tried to kill me, he says, but I am protected by God and the people. The Venezuelan government blames Colombia. Colombia blames a rogue militant group. The United States says nothing, but 6 people are arrested in Caracas within 48 hours. They are tortured on camera. One of them, a man named Juan, is an opposition congressman. He is shown on state television with a black eye and a broken nose, confessing to being part of the plot. Human Rights Watch calls it a forced confession. The CIA does not comment, but everyone knows what happened. Someone tried to kill Maduro with drones, and it almost worked. But almost does not count in assassination attempts. July 2019, Trump meets with Guaido at the White House. It is a photo op, a handshake, a speech about democracy. Trump promises all options are on the table. That is code for military intervention. But Trump does not actually want to invade Venezuela, because wars are expensive, and Venezuela is not Iraq. It is not a desert with clear supply lines. It is a jungle with mountains and urban warfare and a population that, despite hating Maduro, does not want American tanks rolling through Caracas. Trump's advisors push for invasion. Bolton wants it. Marco Rubio, the senator from Florida, wants it, but the Pentagon does not. In August, a leaked memo from the Joint Chiefs of Staff estimates that a full invasion of Venezuela would require 150,000 troops, cost $40 billion, and take at least 2 years. The memo concludes, the risks outweigh the strategic benefits. Trump reads it and loses interest. He wants a quick win. Venezuela is not a quick win, so the plan shifts. Instead of invasion, they go for starvation. Sanction the oil. Sanction the food. Sanction the medicine. Make life so unbearable that the population rises up and overthrows Maduro themselves. But the population does not rise up. They flee. Between 2015 and 2020, 6 million Venezuelans leave the country. That is 20% of the population. The largest refugee crisis in the Western Hemisphere since World War II. They walk across the border into Colombia, into Brazil, into Peru, into Ecuador. They take buses to Chile, to Argentina, to the United States. The ones who make it to the U.S. southern border claim asylum. In 2019 alone, 33,000 Venezuelans are processed at the Texas border. Trump calls them economic migrants and tries to deport them. But legally, they qualify as refugees fleeing political persecution, so they stay. And the crisis that the United States created in Venezuela to get rid of Maduro ends up creating a migration crisis on America's own border. The irony is lost on no one except Washington. August 2019, Russia steps in. Not publicly, but quietly. Rosneft, the Russian state oil company, starts buying Venezuelan crude. They pay in euros. They ship it to refineries in India and China, where U.S. pride entwes. Sanctions are harder to enforce. By the end of 2019, Russia is buying 200,000 barrels per day. That is $200 million per month flowing into Maduro's government. Not enough to fix the economy, but enough to keep the regime alive. Putin is not doing this out of charity. He is doing it because he wants a foothold in Latin America. In December 2019, Russian military advisors arrive in Caracas. Officially, they are there to train Venezuelan troops. Unofficially, they are there to make sure the United States does not try another coup. Because if the US moves on Venezuela, they are moving on Russian interests, and Putin has made it very clear that he will not allow that. China does the same. By 2020, Venezuela owes China $60 billion in loans. Most of it borrowed during the Chavez years. The loans were backed by oil. Loan for oil deals, where Venezuela agrees to ship a certain amount of crude to China every year to pay down the debt. But with production collapsing, Venezuela cannot meet the quotas. So China renegotiates. Instead of demanding repayment, they take equity. They take ownership stakes in Venezuelan oil fields. By 2020, China owns 23% of Venezuela's oil infrastructure. They do not care about Maduro. They do not care about democracy. They care about securing long-term energy supplies. And if that means propping up a dictator, so be it. Geopolitics is not a morality play. It is a resource extraction operation. And China is playing the long game. January 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic hits. Venezuela, already on the brink, collapses further. The hospitals have no ventilators, no ICU beds, no oxygen tanks. Doctors are fleeing the country. The official COVID death toll is 5,000 by the end of 2020. The real number is probably 10 times that. But nobody is counting, because the government has stopped publishing health statistics. Maduro uses the pandemic as an excuse to crack down harder. He imposes lockdowns. He arrests journalists for spreading panic. He seizes private hospitals and turns them into military facilities. And the oil production, which was already in free fall, drops to 400,000 barrels per day by December 2020. That is the lowest level in 80 years. Venezuela, the country with the largest oil reserves on Earth, is producing less oil than Ecuador. November 2020, Trump loses the election. Biden wins. And everyone assumes the Venezuela policy will change. Because Biden is a Democrat. Because he campaigned on restoring diplomacy. Because he promised to reverse Trump's hardline approach to Latin America. But when Biden takes office in January 2021, the sanctions stay. Guaido is still recognized as interim president. The State Department still calls Maduro illegitimate. Because the Venezuela policy is not a Trump policy. It is a Washington consensus. The oil lobby does not care who's in the White House. They care about getting their assets back. And as long as Maduro controls PDVSA, they will support any administration that tries to remove him. Biden's envoys meet with Guaido in February 2021. They meet in a hotel in Bogota. The message is simple. We still support you, but you need to deliver. Guaido has been interim president for 2 years. He has held rallies. He has toured Europe. He has given speeches at the United Nations. But he has not taken power. And the Biden administration is running out of patience. March 2021. Maduro makes a move. He announces presidential elections for November 2024. Not immediate elections. Elections 3 years away. It is a stalling tactic, but it creates a problem for Guaido, because if Maduro is holding elections, even fake ones, it becomes harder for the international community to justify recognizing an unelected interim president. The European Union starts to waver. In April 2021, the EU announces it will no longer recognize Guaido as president. They will recognize him as a key opposition leader, but not as head of state. It is a semantic shift, but it matters, because it means the international coalition is fracturing. By the end of 2021, 12 countries have withdrawn recognition. Guaido is losing legitimacy faster than Maduro, and the United States cannot prop him up forever. But the sanctions remain. And in May 2021, they get worse. The Biden administration adds 55 more Venezuelan officials to the sanctions list: judges, mayors, police chiefs, anyone connected to the Maduro regime. The Treasury Department also sanctions 6 Mexican companies for helping Venezuela evade oil sanctions. The companies were acting as middlemen, buying Venezuelan crude and reselling it to Asian markets. The sanctions shut them down overnight. By mid-2021, Venezuela's oil exports are down to 350,000 barrels per day. The economy has shrunk by 75% since 2013. It is the worst peacetime economic collapse in modern history. Worse than the Great Depression. Worse than the Soviet Union's collapse in 1991. And still, Maduro does not fall. June 2021. The answer becomes clear. Maduro survives because he is not governing a country anymore. He is governing a criminal network. The oil that is still being produced is not going through official channels. It is being smuggled. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime releases a report estimating that 60% of Venezuelan oil exports are now controlled by criminal organizations. Drug cartels, the ELN guerrillas from Colombia, Hezbollah cells operating in the Maracaibo region. These groups do not care about sanctions. They do not use banks. They use cash, Bitcoin, gold, They load the oil onto rust bucket tankers with their transponders turned off. They sail to Trinidad, to Cuba, to West Africa, to anywhere that will take it. And the Venezuelan military, the same military that is supposed to stop smuggling, is running the operation. A report by the International Crisis Group in August 2021 identifies 42 Venezuelan generals involved in illegal oil exports. The profits are estimated at $5 billion per year. None of it goes to the government budget. It goes into private accounts in Panama, in the Cayman Islands, in Macau. Maduro is not a president anymore. He is a cartel boss in a suit. September 2021, Alex Saab is arrested. He is a Colombian businessman. But more importantly, he is Maduro's bagman. For a decade, Saab has been laundering money for the Venezuelan government. He sets up shell companies. He moves oil money through front corporations in Turkey, in Russia, in China. The United States has been hunting him since 2019. They finally grab him in Cape Verde, a small island nation off the coast of West Africa. He is extradited to Miami in October 2021. The charges are money laundering and sanctions evasion. The prosecution estimates that Saab moved $3.7 billion on behalf of Maduro between 2011 and 2020. Maduro goes on television and calls it kidnapping. Alex Saab is a diplomat, he says. This is a violation of international law. But Saab is not a diplomat. He is a criminal. And he starts talking. In November 2021, he agrees to cooperate with U.S. prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. He provides bank records, shell company registration documents, names of officials in 14 countries who helped him move the money. The revelations are devastating, but they do not bring down Maduro, because the people Saab names are either dead, in exile, or protected by governments that do not extradite. February 2022, Russia invades Ukraine, and overnight, the global energy market explodes. Oil prices spike from $75 per barrel in January to $125 by March. Europe is scrambling to replace Russian oil. The United States is scrambling to increase domestic production. And suddenly Venezuela matters again. Because even at 400,000 barrels per day, that is 400,000 barrels that Europe desperately needs. In March 2022, a delegation from the Biden administration flies to Caracas. It is the first official U.S. visit to Venezuela in 3 years. They meet with Maduro in the presidential palace. The meeting lasts 2 hours. The agenda is simple. We will ease sanctions if you increase oil production and hold free elections. Maduro listens. He nods. And then he says no. Because he knows he has leverage now. The United States needs his oil more than he needs their recognition. He counters with his own offer. Remove all sanctions. Release Alex Saab. Unfreeze our assets. And then we will talk about elections. The U.S. delegation leaves empty-handed, but the fact that they came at all is a victory for Maduro, because it proves that sanctions do not work. Not when the global order is fracturing. Not when energy security trumps human rights. In April 2022, the Biden administration quietly authorizes Chevron to negotiate with PDVSA, not to drill, just to talk. The company sends a team to Caracas. They tour the oil fields. They assess the infrastructure. The refineries are in ruins. The wells are capped. It would take $10 billion in 5 years to bring Venezuelan oil production back to 2 million barrels per day. Chevron's internal memo, leaked to Reuters in June, concludes that Venezuela is not a viable short-term solution to the energy crisis. The talks stall, but the door is open, and Maduro knows that eventually the United States will come crawling back. November 2022. The U.S. authorizes Chevron to resume limited operations in Venezuela. It is a stunning reversal. After 4 years of maximum pressure, after 54 countries recognizing Guaido, after calling Maduro a dictator and a narco-trafficker, the Biden administration blinks. Chevron is allowed to pump oil again, not sell it freely. The revenue has to go into an escrow account to pay down Venezuela's debt to Chevron. But oil is flowing again. The first tanker leaves Venezuelan waters on December 3, 2022. It carries 200,000 barrels. Destination, Texas. The sanctions are not lifted, but they are cracked. And once the door opens, it never fully closes again. January 2023. Guaido's interim government collapses. Not with a bang, with a whimper. The Venezuelan National Assembly, controlled by the opposition, votes to dissolve the interim presidency. Guaido is out. After 4 years of claiming to be president, he is just another exiled politician. He moves to Miami. He gives speeches at think tanks. He writes op-eds. But nobody is listening anymore because he failed. He had the backing of 54 countries, the most powerful sanctions regime in history, and the full weight of the United States government. And he still could not take power. Because in the end, power is not about recognition. It is about control. And Maduro had the guns, the oil, and the willingness to do whatever it took to stay alive. March 2023, Maduro announces he is running for re-election in 2024. The opposition fields a candidate, a woman named Maria Corina Machado. She is a former congresswoman, a free market libertarian, the anti-Chavez. She wins the opposition primary with 93% of the vote. 2 million people vote for her in an unofficial primary organized by the opposition. It is the largest turnout for an opposition event in a decade. For a moment, it looks like hope. But in June 2023, the Venezuelan Supreme Court, packed with Maduro loyalists, bans her from running. The charge is administrative, something about violating campaign finance rules. It is absurd. Everyone knows it, but the court does not care. Maduro is not taking any chances. He will run against a candidate he selects, or he will run unopposed. Either way, he will win. July 28, 2024. Election Day. Maduro wins with 51% of the vote. The opposition claims fraud. Exit polls show Machado's replacement, a candidate named Edmundo Gonzalez, winning with 67%. The opposition publishes 83% of the ballot tallies on a website. Independent auditors verify them. They show Gonzalez winning by 40 points. The Carter Center, which monitored the election, calls it fraudulent. The Organization of American States calls it illegitimate. Protests erupt in Caracas. Hundreds of thousands of people take to the streets. The Bolivarian National Guard opens fire. 23 people are killed in the first week. Maduro arrests 2,000 protesters. He calls them terrorists. He calls it a CIA coup. And then, on August 5, 2024, he does something unprecedented. He orders the arrest of Edmundo Gonzalez, the opposition candidate. Gonzalez flees to Spain. He is granted asylum on September 8, 2024. Maria Corina Machado goes into hiding. And just like that, the opposition is decapitated again. But this time, the international community does not recognize Maduro. Even countries that stayed neutral before, like Brazil and Colombia, refuse to accept the results. The United States imposes new sanctions on August 15, 2024. The European Union does the same. But the sanctions do not matter anymore. Because oil is at $90 per barrel. Because China is still buying. Because Russia is still buying. Because India, the world's third largest oil importer, does not care about democracy. They care about cheap energy, and Venezuelan crude, sold at a 20% discount, is very cheap. By the end of 2024, Venezuela is exporting 550,000 barrels per day. Not much by historical standards, but enough to keep the regime afloat. October 2024. The math becomes unavoidable. Venezuela sits on 304 billion barrels of proven oil reserves. At $90 per barrel, that is $27 trillion. But the reserves are not liquid. They are extra heavy crude. Tar sands. It requires advanced refining. It requires capital investment. It requires infrastructure that has been rotting for 2 decades. Independent analysts estimate that only 40% of Venezuela's reserves are economically recoverable with current technology. That is still 120 billion barrels. That is still $10.8 trillion. But getting it out of the ground would cost $500 billion in infrastructure investment over 20 years. No oil company will invest that money while Maduro is in power, because he has already nationalized them once, and he will do it again the moment it is profitable. So the oil stays in the ground, and the country continues to starve. December 2024. Maduro is still in power. He is 62 years old. He has survived 4 assassination attempts, 2 coups, a civil uprising, the largest sanctions regime ever imposed on a single country. the recognition of a rival president by half the world. And he is still standing, not because he is a genius, not because he is beloved, but because he controls the military. And the military controls the oil. And as long as the oil keeps flowing into their offshore accounts, they will keep him alive. The Venezuelan people are not so lucky. 7.7 million have fled the country as of January 2025. That is 25% of the population. The ones who remain live on less than $2 a day. Child malnutrition is at 40%. The hospitals have no medicine. The schools have no teachers. The currency is still worthless. People use US dollars for everything now. The bodega, the bus fare, the bribes to get your passport renewed. The bolivar exists only on paper. And the oil. The $300 trillion in oil. It sits under the ground, untouched, guarded by a regime that would rather let it rot than give it up. Because giving it up means losing power. And losing power in Venezuela means death or exile. Maduro knows this. The generals know this. They are not holding on to power because they believe in socialism. They are holding on to it because it is the only thing keeping them alive. The United States knows this too. But they cannot invade, they cannot bomb, they cannot coup their way to victory. Because every time they try, Maduro survives. And every time he survives, he gets stronger. Here is the lesson. The dark, unavoidable lesson. Resource wars are not won by the side with the most firepower. They are won by the side willing to endure the most suffering. The United States imposed sanctions that destroyed Venezuela's economy, that killed tens of thousands through starvation and medical neglect. That triggered the largest refugee crisis in the hemisphere. And Maduro is still there, still drilling oil, still selling it to anyone who will pay, still ruling over the wreckage of a country that used to be the richest in South America. Because the United States wanted the oil, but they did not want it badly enough to invade. They wanted regime change, but they did not want it badly enough to accept the cost. So they used sanctions, economic warfare, starvation as policy, and it did not work. Because you cannot sanction a dictatorship into democracy. You can only sanction a population into misery. Maduro will die in office, not from a coup, not from an election, from old age. And when he dies, the generals will choose his successor. And the oil will stay in the ground. And the Venezuelan people will keep fleeing. And the United States will keep pretending that their sanctions are about democracy and human rights. But they are not. They never were. This was always about the $300 trillion, about who controls it, about who profits from it. And in the end, nobody won. Not the United States, not Venezuela, not even Maduro, because the oil is worthless if you cannot get it out of the ground. And you cannot get it out of the ground if the entire country is a failed state. The greatest heist in history is the oil that was never stolen, the wealth that was never extracted, the $300 trillion that sits beneath a nation of ghosts, guarded by generals who would rather watch it burn than let anyone else have it. Nicolás Maduro is still president of Venezuela. The oil is still in the ground, and the empire that tried to take it walks away with nothing but a bill for the sanctions and a refugee crisis at its own border. That is not justice. That is not victory. That is just what happens when greed outlasts strategy, and suffering becomes policy. And a machine built to extract resources discovers that some things cannot be taken, only destroyed.